And it is because we are Gators. Yes, go Gators. Thank you, Chairman Bilirakis, and thank you to our witnesses who are appearing before us today. As you can see, we are ready for football season, despite it being 109 degrees here in Washington, D.C. Ms. Khan, I'm going to start with you, and I apologize if these questions have been asked. I am in 3 competing hearings at the same time, so my apologies. Ms. Khan, according to the Office of Personnel Management, 87% of surveyed FTC employees agreed that senior agency officials maintained high standards of integrity and honesty. In 2021, this percentage plummeted to 53% and dropped further to 47% in 2022. This is all under your leadership. Why, under your leadership, has this number continued to decline?
Thanks, Congresswoman, and let me just say it's such an honor to serve alongside the talented and dedicated staff of the FTC. Those numbers have actually increased. The FTC this past year was among the 10 best places to work among mid-sized government agencies, and we'll continue to identify additional ways that we can make sure we're able to recruit and maintain the best talent. One source of complaint that we hear a lot about is pay. We know that we can't compete with private sector pay, but increasingly, we also can't compete with pay of other federal agencies like the Federal Reserve, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And so one way that, I think Congress could be really helpful is actually putting the FTC's pay scale on parity with the pay scale of the financial regulators.
So in 2021 and then in 2022, it dropped in half. Right. And then you say it's coming back up. Is that because those that have been dissatisfied with your leadership have since left rather than some radical turnaround happening at the agency? And I'll use that as a segue because in the same vein, your former colleague, Commissioner Christine Wilson, outlined concerns about your leadership in a 2023 Wall Street Journal editorial. And one example she used was the FTC challenge to Meta's acquisition of the virtual reality gaming company Within. Now, Ms. Wilson said, quote, consider the FTC's challenge to Meta's acquisition of Within, a virtual reality gaming company. Before joining the FTC, Ms. Khan, you argued that Meta should be blocked from making any future acquisitions and wrote a report on the same issues as a congressional staffer. She would now sit as a purportedly impartial judge and decide whether Meta can acquire Within. Spurning due process considerations and federal ethics obligations, my Democratic colleagues on the commission affirmed Ms. Khan's decision not to recuse herself, end quote. Ms. Khan, you investigated Meta as counsel for the House Judiciary Committee as a congressional staffer, correct?
That's correct.
Now, would your remarks towards Meta and your investigative history against the company not be grounds for recusal from the case?
So the federal ethics laws require recusal if you have financial conflicts of interest. So if you own huge amounts of Facebook stock, for example, or if you have close family ties to Facebook. I have neither of those. And so I followed the standard that was laid out that ultimately led me to conclude that I was not required to recuse. As a general matter, I think there's been a broad recognition that dominant technology companies have been able to get away with gobbling up a lot of their competitors and that we need to be more vigilant. And I've been really pleased at the FTC that we've been scrutinizing these dominant technology companies when they're making acquisitions that we have reason to believe might violate the law.
But as you laid out, you said you followed that to the letter of the law, right? That the ethics guidelines say that as long as you don't have any stocks, right, or financial obligations or considerations with that company, that makes it okay, despite the fact that you investigated them, were critical, derogatory even in your work against Meta previously, and then now you're supposed to be impartial. I mean, by the standard of as long as you don't have financial obligations or an interest, I mean, heck, half of Congress, I mean, Speaker Emeritus Pelosi has financial ties and stocks with all these companies, and yet here we are making laws, which is why I think it should be prohibited that members of Congress own individual stocks of companies personally. But if you were faced with a similar case with a company that you had investigated as a staffer or made disparaging remarks about, in the future, would you consider recusing yourself? Because the optics are pretty damning. Don't you agree?
Congressman, I would just disagree with that characterization. I had certain expertise in certain markets, and I think that's what contributed to my being appointed in this role. And I think it would be really dangerous if we allowed companies that accumulate a lot of economic and political power to start picking and choosing which enforcers get to oversee them and which enforcers don't. And so I followed to the letter the legal standard that says if you have made up your mind entirely about the facts and the law, then you should recuse yourself. But if not, there's no requirement. I think we need to keep the bigger picture in mind as well.
Well, and I know my time has expired, but just yes or no, do you believe that the current concentrated app marketplace is fair for consumers and developers? Yes or no?
Congressman, certainly we've heard a lot of concerns about that concentration. There are lawsuits that have been filed, including by our colleagues at the Justice Department.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.